African state of Zimbabwe.
Africa has received hundreds of billions of dollars in foreign aid, about 1.2 trillion actually, over the past decades. So why does underdevelopment and poverty still persist in most African states today in the 21st century? And my thoughts on the issue is that what if the problem isn't a lack of aid, but actually a lack of system and institutions to actually carry out the necessary work to actually develop these countries? In this video, I plan on breaking down some really uncomfortable ideas that foreign aid, with all its good intention, may actually be part of the problem with Africa. And this isn't just my opinion, it's based on a research paper I wrote, linked below in the description, where I go much deeper into the political economy behind all of this. So check it out, let's dive into it. The traditional view is simple. Poor countries lack capital, so rich countries send money to help them develop. And on the surface, it makes a lot of sense. Aid has funded schools, hospitals, and infrastructure. But then, here's the problem. If aid is supposed to develop countries, why hasn't it led to any real change that Africans can actually see in their day-to-day lives? Any sustained growth, long-term transformation? And that's where we need to go deeper into incentives, institutions, and power structures in African states. But then we have to look into what the data shows us. One of the most overlooked effects of foreign aid is how it changes who governments are accountable to. In strong states, governments rely on taxes, and when citizens fund the state, they usually require and demand accountability. But when governments rely on external aid instead of domestic revenue, instead of taxes, for instance, I could give you an example. In Nigeria, governments don't consistently collect taxes. But then Nigeria should be a different example because Nigeria, South Africa are one of the richer countries in Africa who receive less foreign aid. But then most poor states in Africa don't rely on taxes, they rely on donors, on foreign aid. But the point I was trying to make is that these funds now go towards corruption, embezzlement, but the video on corruption is going to be for another day. Let's move on.
The IMF and World Bank serve critical roles in the international system.
So instead of building responsive institutions, you risk creating systems that are more focused on securing aid than serving the people. Like as the clip you just saw, you saw the IMF giving a speech and then you saw protest. What I was trying to depict by that was basically that the IMF gives out loans to third world countries in Africa, and then the governments are so focused on getting this aid, and then we now have to talk about corruption, which is for a whole nother video. And then these people, and then the public funds don't go to the people and instead into the pockets of the politicians. And then you now see protests and mass violence and poverty, and you see what it does to these states. Now, we've talked about a lot of things, but I think we still have to go into this. Let's talk about the structure of the so-called foreign aid. A lot of foreign aid isn't just about free money. It comes as loans, which means countries aren't just receiving aid, they're accumulating debt in the process. In fact, developing countries have recently paid more to creditors than they have received in aid. And then we also have to take into account that the cycle is also an issue. They borrow, they repay, and they borrow again. And instead of fueling growth, it drains public resources, money that could have gone to healthcare, education, or infrastructure in total. But then I want to expel the thought that the issue is the West or the people giving out this foreign aid and grants and loans. In fact, I personally believe that we should all come to one consensus that one of the major issues is the elites at the top, the political figures, the people who handle these funds, because of mismanagement and wrong investments that these loans don't lead to any tangible results for the African people in the long run. Because if these loans and investments were put into the correct places, into sectors that could actually produce wealth for future generations, we wouldn't be struggling with this same recurring issue. So I believe that the problem should be the corrupt elites that run these countries, and that is something that deeply angers me. As much as I'd like to keep it extremely analytical, I just want to show you a side of myself and what I believe the problem really is. I'm a strong advocate for Pan-Africanism, I'm a continentalist and nationalist, and I believe that Africa can do better under the correct leadership. And I believe that one day I'll be in that position of power to improve Africa with the help of everybody around me. And I believe if we all come together, we can actually do something. That's what I personally believe. But I think let's keep the arguments going into the next point.
27 years ago, the celebration had been genuine. There was hope and there was freedom after decades of defiant white minority rule, which ended in a 13-year bush war.
But then it goes even deeper. Aid often comes with conditions, especially from institutions like the IMF or World Bank. Policies like privatization, currency devaluation, and cutting public spending. Now, these are called structural adjustment programs, and while they're framed as economic reforms, they often reduce a country's ability to control its own economy. So now development isn't just influenced internally, it's also shaped externally.
Investments in universal health coverage are investments in human security and sustainability.
And here's the more controversial part. There's an entire global system built around aid. Governments, NGO, consultants, institutions, and many of these actors depend on the continuation of aid flows. Think about that for a second. Which creates a quiet but powerful incentive, not necessarily to solve underdevelopment, but to manage it. In that scene, underdevelopment isn't just a failure, it becomes a part of the system that sustains itself gradually and consistently, and maybe forever if Africa and Africa's corrupt leaders don't wake up. Now, to be clear, this doesn't mean that aid is useless, of course. Aid has saved lives, it has improved living conditions in many places, but the key issue is this: short-term relief is not the same thing as long-term development. So, in my strong conclusion, I want to say that real development doesn't come from outside. It comes from strong institutions, and I keep on hammering this in all of my shorts. It comes from strong institutions, accountable governance, and domestic economic system, sorry. So, and when aid undermines these things, even unintentionally, it can hold countries back. If you want deeper breakdowns of this argument, my full research paper is linked in the description. And if you're interested in more analytical content like this, I'd encourage you to subscribe and leave a like in comments. Because the real conversations are always deeper than they seem. And we have to have more conversations like this. I'll see you in the next one.